I want to start with the number because I know that is what you are thinking about. $400,000 a year, a corner office on the 31st floor, a title that made people at dinner parties lean forward slightly when I said it. A life that looked, from the outside, like the answer to every question a woman in her 40s could be asking. I walked away from all of it on a Thursday afternoon in March. I did not have a plan. I did not have a backup. I did not have a husband with a steady income to catch me, or an inheritance waiting, or a business idea that had been quietly building in the background for years. I had a resignation letter I had written and deleted 47 times, a shaking hand, and a certainty so deep it frightened me. I slid the letter across my manager's desk, and I watched his face go through 5 different expressions in 4 seconds. And then I walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and stood there watching the numbers count down, thinking, what have you done? What have you done? What have you done? My name is Sandra. I am 48 years old, and I want to tell you the truth about what happened before that Thursday and what happened after it, because I think the version of this story that gets told most often is a lie. The lie goes like this: woman is trapped in soul-crushing job. Woman has brave awakening. Woman leaps. Woman lands in beautiful sun-drenched life full of purpose and farmers markets and a face that finally looks rested. Everyone in the comments says you are so inspiring. The end. That is not what happened to me. What happened to me was messier and slower and darker than that, and I think you deserve to hear the real version. Because if you are sitting somewhere right now with a quiet voice inside you saying this is not it, this cannot be it, then you deserve the truth about what listening to that voice actually costs. It costs a lot, and it is worth it, but not in the way the inspirational posts tell you. I need to tell you who I was before I tell you who I became. I was good at my job the way some people are good at holding their breath, impressive to watch, possible to maintain for a surprisingly long time, but not sustainable, and built entirely on the refusal to come up for air. I had been in finance for 22 years. I had clawed my way up through an industry that did not particularly want women at the top, which meant I had worked twice as hard and asked for half as much for 2 decades before anyone started treating my presence in certain rooms as inevitable rather than provisional. I had missed my sister's wedding rehearsal dinner for a client call. I had spent my 40th birthday on a plane to Frankfurt. I had dated 2 men seriously in 22 years and ended both relationships because the job always came first, and they eventually, reasonably, stopped believing that would change. I told myself this was ambition. I told myself this was strength. I told myself that the women who stepped back, who chose differently, who decided the climb wasn't worth it, were the ones who hadn't wanted it badly enough. I believed that completely. I believed it right up until the morning I sat in a meeting about quarterly projections and realized I could not remember driving to the office. Not the route, not the parking, not the elevator. 45 minutes of my life gone. My body had carried me from my apartment to a conference room chair entirely without me. I sat there looking at the spreadsheet on the screen and I thought, how long has this been happening? And the honest answer was a long time, a very long time. I did not quit that day. I want to be clear about that because the story people tell themselves about moments of clarity is that they lead immediately to action. They don't. At least mine didn't. I went home that night and poured a glass of wine and sat on my balcony and looked at the city and told myself I was fine. I was tired. Everyone was tired. This was what success felt like from the inside. Nobody told you it felt like disappearing because if they did, nobody would chase it and the whole system would fall apart. I went back the next day, and the day after that, I went back for another 8 months, but something had cracked. And once something cracks, you cannot make it whole again, just by pressing on it hard enough. I know that now. Those 8 months were the longest of my life. I was doing the same job I had always done, performing at the same level, receiving the same praise. And underneath all of it, I was screaming. Not in any way anyone could see or hear, just internally, constantly, the way you scream in dreams when nothing comes out. I started noticing things I had trained myself not to notice. The way Sunday evenings felt like a physical weight settling onto my chest. The way I could go 4 days without a single moment that felt like mine. The way I had stopped reading, stopped cooking, stopped calling my mother back with any consistency because there was always something more urgent and the urgent things never stopped. I noticed that I could not tell you the last time I had laughed, really laughed, the kind that takes you by surprise and leaves you breathless. I could not tell you. I tried and I could not find it. That frightened me more than anything else. There was a woman at my gym. I did not know her well. We had exchanged maybe 200 words total over 3 years of seeing each other at 6 in the morning. Her name was Patrice. She had left a senior position at a law firm 4 years earlier to, as far as I could tell, do almost nothing. She taught a yoga class twice a week. She had some kind of small online business she seemed unconcerned about. She looked like someone who slept. I hated her a little, if I am being honest. Not her specifically. I hated what she represented. The choice she had made that I had decided was a kind of failure dressed up as freedom. One morning, I got to the gym late and she was the only other person in the locker room, and I don't know what came over me, but I just asked her, I said, "Do you ever regret it?" And she looked at me in the mirror for a moment and said, "I regret the 4 years before it, every single day. I thought about that for 3 months, and then I wrote the letter." The first thing nobody tells you about walking away from a life that looks good on paper is that the grief is real. I want to say that plainly because I was not prepared for it and it nearly broke me. I thought I would feel relief. I thought I would feel free. I thought I would wake up the first morning after my last day and feel like a window had been opened in a room that had been shut too long. I did feel that for about 40 minutes, and then the terror came. Not the practical terror, though, that was there too. The deeper terror. The identity terror. The who am I if I am not this terror? Because I had given that job 22 years. It was not just what I did. It was the answer to every question anyone had ever asked me about myself. It was how I understood my own value. It was the story I told that made me make sense. And I had just put it down, voluntarily, in a healthy economy, with no diagnosis forcing my hand, with no dramatic breakdown, with nothing to point to except a quiet internal voice that said this is wrong, and 8 months of refusing to listen, and then one morning, finally, listening. People did not know what to do with that. I did not know what to do with that. My mother called me 2 days after I resigned. Someone had told her. I had not, which tells you something about what I expected her reaction to be. She said, "Sandra, what happened?" As if something must have happened. As if the only explanation for a woman leaving a job like that was catastrophe. I said, "Nothing happened, Mom." I said I just couldn't do it anymore. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "But you were so good at it." And I said, "I know." And she said, "Then I don't understand." I said, "I know that too." We sat on the phone in silence for almost a full minute, which is a long time to sit in silence with your mother. And then she said, "Are you okay? Not are you sure, or what is your plan, or how will you manage? Just are you okay?" And I started crying in a way I had not cried in years, the ugly kind, the kind with no dignity in it at all. And I said, "I don't know yet." And she said, "Okay." And somehow that was enough. I want to tell you about the first 3 months because I think this is the part that gets left out of every story like mine. It was not a montage. It was not a blooming. It was not the first chapter of a memoir that ends in a Tuscan garden with a new understanding of what matters. It was 3 months of waking up at 5:30 out of habit with nowhere to be, of sitting in my apartment at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, feeling like I had done something wrong, of running into former colleagues and watching their faces arrange themselves into expressions of careful concern, of answering the question, "So, what are you doing now?" with a vagueness that cost me something every time. I had savings. I was not in danger. But money is not the only currency a life runs on, and I was bankrupt in ways that had nothing to do with my bank account. I had no structure. I had no community outside of work. I had no idea, genuinely no idea, what I liked to do with time that was entirely my own. That last part was the most shocking thing I discovered. I had optimized myself so completely for professional performance that I had lost the ability to simply be, to sit with an afternoon and let it be an afternoon. Every instinct I had was oriented toward output, toward productivity, toward the next task on a list that no longer existed. I had to learn how to do nothing. At 47 years old, I had to learn it from scratch, and I was terrible at it for a very long time. I am not going to tell you that I found myself in a pottery class or a hiking trail or a conversation with a stranger on a train, because that is the version of this story that gets written and shared, and I think it flattens something that deserves to stay three-dimensional. What I will tell you is that it happens slowly, without announcement, in the accumulation of small, ordinary moments that I finally had time to actually inhabit. I started cooking again, not impressive cooking, not the kind you photograph, just cooking. Standing in my kitchen at 7 in the evening with no reason to hurry, listening to something I wanted to listen to, making food I actually wanted to eat. It sounds like nothing. It was not nothing. I started calling my mother back the same day, every time. That sounds like nothing either. I started sleeping, real sleep, the kind where you wake up and the night feels like it actually happened. I had forgotten what that felt like. I had been running on 4 and 5 hours for so long that I had reclassified exhaustion as my baseline and called it fine. I started sitting with discomfort instead of immediately filling it. That one took the longest. The impulse to be productive, to justify my existence with output, to earn my place in every hour of every day, that impulse did not go quietly. It argued with me for months. It still argues with me sometimes, but I got better at telling it to wait. People ask me when I knew it was the right decision. And I always pause on that question because I think it assumes a kind of clean resolution that real life doesn't actually deliver. I can tell you the moment that came closest. It was about 7 months after I left. I was at my sister's kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, nothing special happening, just the two of us drinking tea and talking about nothing in particular. Our mother had come for the weekend. Her grandchildren were somewhere in the back of the house making noise. The light was doing that late afternoon thing where it goes golden and slow. And I was there, completely there, not planning the week ahead or processing the week behind, not half present while the other half of me drafted emails in my head, just there, at the table, in the light, with my family, on a Sunday. I excused myself to use the bathroom, and I stood at the sink and looked at my face in the mirror for a long moment. And I thought, there you are, not triumphantly, not with music swelling underneath it, just quietly, the way you might say it to someone who has been away a long time and has finally come back through the door. There you are. I want to talk to you now, directly, if you will let me. If you are in a life that looks right from the outside and feels wrong from the inside, I need you to know that the feeling is not ingratitude. It is not weakness. It is not a phase that will pass if you push through it for one more quarter or one more promotion or one more year. It is information, and it is telling you something true. I am not going to tell you to quit your job. I am not going to tell you that the leap is always the answer, or that the other side is always better, or that the voice inside you is always right about what it wants, even when it is right, that something needs to change. What I am going to tell you is this: the life you are living at full speed, without pause, without the courage to look at it directly, is still your life. The years are still passing, the Sunday evenings are still coming, the mornings where you cannot remember the drive are accumulating, and one day, if you are lucky, you will sit in a bathroom somewhere and look at your face in a mirror and ask when you stopped being in the room. I hope you ask it before I did. I hope you ask it with enough time left to like the answer. I am 48 years old. I left a life that other people wanted and spent a year learning how to want my own. I have a consulting practice now, small and deliberately so. I work with 2 clients at a time, and I choose them carefully, and I stop at 6 in the evening, and I mean it. I make about a quarter of what I made before. I sleep 8 hours. I call my mother back. Some days I wonder what I could have been if I had stayed. If I had found a way to want it more, or to need it less, or to become the kind of person who could live inside that life without losing herself in it. But mostly, I don't wonder. Mostly, I sit at my kitchen table in the morning with coffee that I actually taste, and I think about the woman I was at 5 in the morning in a gym locker room, not yet brave enough to want something different, and I feel a compassion for her that I could not have felt while I was still her. She was doing the best she could with what she believed was true. What she believed was not true, and she found her way here anyway. So can you.